Hello, everybody. My name is Nathan Byrd, founder of Acquisition Conference and Acquisition IQ Network, as well as the Acquisition IQ podcast. And we just wanted to say thank you so much for watching this episode with Dr. Remington Curtis. Dr. Remington Curtis, a CPA and PhD, has excelled in finance, academia, and leadership with experience at KPMG, Alter Domas, and as a professor of accounting. He's led research on valuation and investor risk. He's also served as the CFO, CTO, and controller for startups and investment funds. A former Utah Army National Guard officer, he brings strategic expertise and discipline from overseeing special operations logistics in Iraq. His financial acumen and innovation makes him a vital asset to the world.
My mother will be so proud of that intro. Thank you.
Well, I think there's a lot of people out there that are looking to buy companies, looking to sell companies, and there are so many different dynamics that go into this. We just spoke earlier about even family dynamics and generational organizations and how to navigate the complexities of relationships. I think that's a topic that we could probably first begin with because as, again, business owners, we're constantly bombarded with relationships that we must deal with, trust that we must identify. So share with us a little bit more about your experience in this area.
Yeah. So as a broker, we work with a lot of sellers, right? And it's very common to have multi-generational ownership included within in these businesses. And there's an adage, right? It's a common one saying that everybody who has a partner wishes they didn't. Everyone who doesn't have a partner wishes they did. And that's just because there are so many complexities in these relationships, just like you were talking about frustration with, somebody saying the wrong thing or not following through with what you wanted, or you feel like they pinned something on you that was maybe a little unfair. And then also the concern about being unequally yoked. Right? Are all partners pulling their fair share? And of course they're not. It's impossible to ever be able to do this. And so it's very common that these businesses that have partnerships within family dynamics, it just ends up complex lots of times. And so when you're dealing with these, sometimes you'll be one half analyst, one half like marriage counselor or family counselor in some ways. And what we find in these situations is just communication is the best. Being able to have honest, transparent communications. Those families that work together the best, or any partnership that works together the best, you'll know this, are those that can communicate clearly and still have respect for the talents and ability and drive of the other.
That's extremely valuable, I think. And again, within businesses, because you're a business broker, so you go through a lot of different transactions. So you're seeing trends. What are some of these trends that you're seeing that provide a positive outcome, but also a negative outcome when you're trying to sell a business or buy a business?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think for us personally in the firm, we like to represent businesses that represent or have three key pillars. One is that they've been a good, productive, successful business. Two, that they've been doing it successfully for a long time, or at least minimum 5 years, right? So that they're established to reduce the risk. And then the other one is the dynamic of the ownership. Are they reasonable? Do they have appropriate expectations? Are they somebody that you can have this direct communication with? And it turns out that if you have all three of those, then I think most of the time getting to the end of an acquisition is maybe not easy, but it's always achievable. And so those are, I guess, the biggest trends that we're saying is it's really the seller entity as well as the ownership that is driving success in these.
I don't want to go too far away from what we had just began with dynamics and relationships. So let's touch again on how we can have good communication, because you had just said that there are various ways that you can do that, but what are ways that you are suggesting that would help these business owners out there that are either going through an acquisition or they're creating value for the company to sell?
Well, number one is to have routine meetings, right? Just kind of your checkups within the organization. So if we're talking specifically about from the seller side, right, and as they're getting ready or exploring this opportunity to sell, they need to have had recurring conversations. They need to set out and meet with somebody that helps them understand what the likely selling price will be, understand what the deal structures will be, and understand what will be required of each of the parties after the sell. And so as long as you're able to sit down, maybe talk it out, write down what you understand, send follow-up emails later so that you have documentation so that it's very clear for anybody, because with memories, we tend to misremember conversations and walk away with different feelings, even though we were all there in the same moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that to be true, even from my own experience. You get excited and you're sharing so many different things literally back and forth. And that's why AI note takers are actually taking off right now, because they give you the sentiment and they give you the bullet points of action items to take. And it's a really quite an amazing thing. Do you guys implement or use some technology within your practice to help with the advancements?
Yeah, we certainly do. We will use AI note takers, and we use, ChatGPT for various, items that are being done. But besides that, it's pretty minimal what we're using AI for at this point, because I think a lot of it is relationship based. And a lot of it is being able to understand clearly what it is sellers and buyers are looking for, and understanding what is the part that we all agree on, and then try to find paths that work for both sides.
Well, and again, that's what I'm seeing too with the amount of transactions that are happening, and then the amount of automation that is starting to begin. At times, there can be a loss of the interpersonal communication, the understanding of one, understanding the other, and then it ultimately leads to a breakdown in the exchange based on the reliancy on the automation. So if you miss the relational component, but yet only look at the automation, there has to be a balance of the two.
Yeah, automation should always be a tool, but it should never be the primary factor, right? It's not the master itself. It's a tool that's used by the master.
Yeah, I agree. And that's good. You touched on some things like valuation, and as a business owner, as well as someone who's looking to buy or sell the company, you've got to know the value of a business. So walk me through the different ways that one would value a company.
Awesome. I love this topic. My PhD was looking at valuations, right? And so
that's why I asked.
Let's dig into this, and I'll try to make it not too nerdy for everybody, okay? So I'm going to give you the very simple formula for valuation. Then we'll talk about why it's not simple at all. All right. Any business is worth the present value of its expected future cash flows. And as long as you're staying focused on that formula, you're able to back into valuation for any particular transaction. So there are kind of three components of that formula. One is expected future cash flows. And so generally what most people will do within the industry is you use an AR1 model, meaning we're going to project next year off of what we did this year. We'll project the year after that off of, our trend and so on and so forth. And so we'll start off, and it surprises me a lot, but lots of times in acquisitions, that's the part that has the least amount of argument in it. Now, there are exceptions to that, but most of the time people understand our valuation is going to be based off of our most recent years. And if it turns out that there is a trend going in, like this was 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago, this year, well, you're not going to value going forward like it's just right there. You'll continue that trend going up, right? And so that projection ends up being relatively easy most of the time. What is more complex is that to determine the present value, you have to assign an interest rate. And that interest rate is going to be based off of the risk as well as the opportunity cost of other investments. And so at a macro level, things are going up and down and changing your opportunity costs. But at a more enterprise level, you have to be able to evaluate the risk. And from person to person, that risk is going to be different from buyer to buyer. Maybe I have experience in the industry, or maybe I'm looking to buy a company and I know that the owner is very involved in the operations of it. And so because I have experience here, I'm able to step in their shoes and there's relatively lower risk. And so to me, that company, the present value of those cash flows is going to be higher relative to just somebody off the street that isn't as experienced. And so when we're looking at valuation, we're always focusing on projected cash flows and what we're able to essentially project and what we're comfortable assuming will happen going forward, and the risk that we're assigning for that particular buyer.
Risk assessment throughout this process. What is one way that you look at risks, and how do you identify what risks are weighted most or what risks aren't weighted as much? Does that make sense? So what is most valuable, what is not as valuable throughout the risk assessment profile?
Yeah, it's going to change across selling entities as well as across buyers, because certain buyers will have confidence in some ways or others. For example, liquidity risk is a major risk for any operating company or with any acquisition, meaning you buy a company and it's going to be very successful, but are you going to be able to finance it until you're able to reap the benefits of that, right? Most companies, they go under because they run out of cash, not necessarily because their economics are not great, right? And so if you are a well-funded entity, that liquidity risk may not be your major concern. If you are a single owner and you're relying on the SBA loans, and so you just have limited liquidity, well, now you will evaluate companies with that cash flow and the reliancy and consistency of it coming through. For you, those will be more valuable relative to other ones that maybe they are very lumpy or have volatility when the cash flow comes out. And so it has to be very individualized off of both your buyer as well as your selling entity.
Very, very good.
Yeah. So in addition to liquidity risk, another one that we'll see is, of course, the concern that any major customers will leave, right, or any key employee turnover. Those are very important, but again, it'll depend on the entity that's acquiring them over whether or not they're willing to assume that risk and how detrimental it will be to their investment in this company, depending on what happens.
As one wanting to increase their overall valuation, what would you suggest for them to do in the organization of their books as well as their long-term contractual agreements that would, in essence, increase or potentially decrease the valuation of the company?
Yeah, that's perfect. So there's really only the two things that you can do to change your value. You can increase your projected cash flow or you can decrease your perceived risk. So to decrease your perceived risk as far as contracts go, if you're able to contract out your current clientele so that it becomes recurring revenue, the value of your business increases quite significantly, right? It's that annual recurring revenue. It's the reason those businesses that have that trade at a much higher multiple relative to those that are just having to renew and find new customers every single year.
Yeah, we're seeing this to be true within the CPG and direct-to-consumer brands and subscription-based models that are able to value add to what these customers are looking for. Obviously, there's so many different types of businesses out there, that have different business models, right? Whether it's a SaaS tech company that has a multiple on subscriptions or, that sustainable cash flow.
Yeah. Another major thing that I don't think most owners understand how important it is for valuation for risk assessment is your accounting records and just the overall records of your business. It turns out that, most business owners, especially smaller on the mid-sized business owners, do not have very good records. And those records are important to first confirm your historic cash flow as well as be able to have comfort in your projections going forward.
You've noticed that many times, I bet you, throughout the organization of the finances of the different companies based on your past, but also how many different transactions. What are 3 things that you would suggest people to do, again, to make sure that their books are in line, as well as their organization of their finances is up to par to be able to continue to increase valuation?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think like with any good question, the answer should be, it depends, right?
Yep.
And so probably the number one thing I would suggest is to meet with somebody that will be able to give you some guidance and evaluate your company, help you understand what are the most important aspects of your particular business, and then how can you document it to prove to any potential buyers that what you're claiming is actually true. So for some entities, it may be that the value is derived mostly from the customer list that they have. For other entities, it may be related to some of the technology that they have, or maybe even their personnel, right? It's the expertise and relationships that are coming through those. And so I guess there's no one answer for every entity, but definitely talking with a qualified business broker, for example, would be a great way to help you receive that education, or maybe some other consultant, or talk to somebody that you think might be interested in acquiring your company and say, what is important to you?
I've had a lot of people say that, oh, because again, we host these conferences and, acquisition conference, and we've had a lot of people that talk about, I'm not sure, is it too early for me to start looking for an exit, or is it too early for me to potentially want to buy a company? What would you say to that?
It's really a personal choice, right? We have this conversation within our offices sometimes of, why do you sell, or when is the right time to sell? And the truth is, you're pretty much always better off, just everything else being equal, if you stay at the business and continue to run it. Most people, the reason that they end up selling is because they're burned out, maybe, or because there's something else that's more important in their life than just continuing to get the cash flow from this business. And so really, it's just up to you over whether or not you're at the stage that you have other activities you'd like to be doing in your life, or other businesses you'd like to pursue, over whether it's the right time. I will say that what I often tell sellers, is that it's best to start considering it about 5 years before you think you want to be out of the business. 5 years times, that's a long time.
Yes.
But that's about the right time period that you should be considering and talking with somebody and saying, what would my exit look like? And that 5-year time period gives you enough time to evaluate where you are, be able to make changes so that you can maximize your value at the exit, and be able to have a clean plan and understand. Because some business owners don't realize that certain acquisitions will require them to stay for multiple years as part of the transition period. And so if I'm sitting there and I'm 65 and I say, hey, I want to be able to hang out with my grandkids at age 70, that doesn't mean that at 69, I can now suddenly sell my business. I might have to stay on for multiple years thereafter. So it may be that the right time to sell in order to truly be out of my business at 70 is 67.
Yeah. So,
Right.
yeah, that's so good. I mean, and then also we've got, again, a whole slew of this younger generation that wants to potentially acquire a company because they're working in maybe a well-paying job. You've got doctors, dentists, these other lawyers, people that have good pay, but they're wanting to look for passive income. How do you walk people through the acquisition process? And share with me more a little bit about that.
You're 100% right. I like to say that business ownership is the new American dream. Right? People grow up wanting to own a business. Not everybody. It turns out that a lot of business owners later decide, hey, this is for the birds. So let's step away a little bit. Or, you're kind of bouncing in and out, because business ownership is hard and it's stressful, but it's challenging and it's exciting and it's yours and you get to grow it. And so when we're talking with people who are looking for businesses to buy and they have that intention, it's important to understand what their goals are. You can be buying a business because you're essentially buying a job. You don't want a boss anymore, but you're also not interested in necessarily going out and conquering the world. You just want something that is yours, that you have control over, right? And so that's a different profile business you'll be looking at. Maybe what it is that you're going out there and you do want to go own this business, grow this empire, sell it at some point, and continue on. And it's just like the mechanism by which you are investing in. Okay. Other people will be looking at it as a very passive type of investment. I will say that passive type of acquisitions are harder to come by. and you're going to have to pay more for them. So you have to be prepared to understand that you're going to find comparables to that business. And this particular business, if it truly is in a situation that you're not going to have to be involved in the day-to-day operations, you're probably going to have to overpay for that. And it makes sense because that's all just compensation for your time. If you're passive, you're being compensated for your investment and oversight. If you're involved in that business, you have to make enough money to all of that oversight investment, but also your particular work.
Extremely valuable. Guys, so this has been Remington. He's a doctor in finance,
Doctor in
accounting. And he's also a business broker, and he's seen several transactions. How many transactions do you think you've gone to?
I don't know. I know my count for last year, and we had 10 very successful transactions last year, and one less successful. But still pretty good.
Share with us about the team integration culture and the strategy on how to have a wonderful exit experience.
Okay, a wonderful
as a buyer experience. So we're just looking about how we can formalize that partnership, create a new vision that both companies are now aligned to have a successful future.
The successful transition starts with the culture and making sure that you're a good fit early in the process, right? You should be able to sit down, have a shared vision, have a shared respect for whoever is selling, as well as they need to respect whoever is buying and understand what the relationship will be like going forward. If you're a buyer, you're going to want to find a company that's selling and that seller is invested emotionally in this company, because then they're going to be there invested to make sure that you're getting the best handoff that's possible. They want this company to succeed. That is typical for 80, 90% of sellers is this was a labor of love and they wanted to continue to flourish going forward. And so because of that, they will continue to support you. And it's also important to have that buy-in of the seller, because they're the ones that are going to be representing you to the employees and to the management team and everybody else that is so vital during that initial transition period. And if the seller, you get the sense they don't really like you or that they're not 100% on board, the employees are familiar with them. They're going to recognize that. And you don't want to start off this investment with kind of that 1 foot out the door by your key employees.
It's interesting to think about as we, we're accredited investors and we have certain thresholds and, things that we have to meet in order to be considered in that class. There needs to be a class that's considered the accredited business buyer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you think about it, because there's so much to learn throughout the process, both understanding what the seller's going through, understanding what the buyer will need to know as you continue to have a successful transition. What have you seen to be an unsuccessful transition?
Well, number one,
you have one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From my perspective, oftentimes I consider it successful primarily off of did the seller get a good value, and did the buyer end up with a good business? Sometimes, it doesn't work out quite so great. So number one key for me is making sure that you have that good relationship with the seller, right? Because you want to make sure that that handoff goes smoothly. In my opinion, if I was advising a buyer and they weren't comfortable with the relationship with the seller, I would advise them find another opportunity. And that's just because when you go through these, you're going to do as much due diligence as you can. Sure, but in the end, you are trusting so much in that seller and what they're telling you is accurate, right? That there's nothing hidden or any problems that you're stepping into that you just wouldn't have any way to be aware of. And so at the first hint of distrust in your seller, you got to step away. And so that's key number one. Apart from that, and as far as success goes, generally you're not wanting to step in and make major changes, right? Go live in the company for 6 months or some time period and observe, learn each person's dynamics and relationships, understand why it is that they're doing the things the way that they are, And maybe you can start making incremental changes or ways to enhance it a little bit, but I wouldn't come in and make major shifts all over. And one is because you want to understand the business more, but also it is a very sensitive moment for your employees. Yes, change is hard and uncomfortable for them. And many employees, when they're faced with the threat of potential change, just get scared and leave anyways, right? Before they even see what the change would be. And so you're trying not to rock the boat too much until you form that relationship with your employees and the organization. And then you will start making your alterations at that point.
Patience, understanding, observation, and then we can start to make changes.
And it's also very clear to understand why it is that you're acquiring this business.
So true.
There can be strategic reasons. One is maybe it's just the cash flow for that entity itself. The other is, are you acquiring this because it enhances your other entities in some way? And so if that's why you're doing it, right, just understanding what's clear, what is important about this acquisition, and making sure that that is always treated with kid gloves. So sacrifice short-term to make sure it's long-term success.
Well, again, this has been Dr. Remington Curtis, business broker, doctor, changing the world and making lives a little bit better by helping them understand the buying and selling process. We need more people just like you during this process to help educate both parties to make a successful transaction.
And if I could, you asked, how is it that sellers understand if it's the right time for them to be, looking into it? I mean, earlier is always better. You're just giving yourself educational information. And you'll remember that one of the things that I suggested in order to evaluate their business was talk to potential buyers. This conference is an excellent opportunity to do that, right? To be able to go and mingle and say, what are you looking for? Understand from a buyer's side what is important, and then evaluate your own entity off of the information you're getting.
We're absolutely thrilled to have Mr. Remington at the Acquisition Conference in Salt Lake City on March 21st. He's going to be one of our panel moderators, helping to facilitate a perfectly ran panel discussion. I believe he's going to do a wonderful job, just like what he did with this podcast today. And guys, if you want more of these, make sure to subscribe to the Acquisition IQ channel, and we look forward to seeing you soon.